Yeah, so I guess I just wanted to, imagine, a lot of my career has kind of been at sort of the stage at companies where they have found a ton of product market fit, and they're at sort of the next phase. And so I thought I'd focus my presentation here on, some of the challenges that I run into as companies start to scale. I'm turning 40 in about a month. And so I was when I was making this slide, it was kind of fun to reflect back. And it seems a long time ago, but I used to be an applied physicist, and I was really into kind of semiconductors and nuclear physics. But I also spent a lot of time developing a deep understanding of business, because I sort of did two degrees, one in applied physics and one in business. And when you look at my career, it's kind of best understood. Some jobs I had where I sort of wore a technology hat, and some jobs I had where I wore more of a business hat. When I was at BlackBerry, I started off in Canada, and I worked for them back when it was really awesome, really like groundbreaking. And I eventually moved out to Singapore, and I was largely responsible kind of in a product pricing role, sort of a revenue defense role. While there, I ended up meeting the owner of AirAsia. For those of you who are familiar with AirAsia is a pretty big airline out here. And so I worked for them in a couple of different capacities. I started out in Malaysia as their group head of technology. And then eventually I pivoted my role to start up their, it was kind of like a corporate VC, which was called Tune Labs. With the idea there was that, we could find startups and help them get access to AirAsia as their first customer. And actually, not included on this slide, we invested in a ton of startups. We ended up also creating a bunch of different businesses there. So lots of learnings. And then from there, I joined Shopify. Shopify was kind of a weird company at that time. Like, it was a fairly old, young company. They hadn't really expanded internationally. I always like to call it, at least back then, they had this kind of field of dreams strategy where they would just build one platform and then hope everybody would adopt it. But when I joined, they decided to really make a considered effort in expanding internationally. And so we started off in Singapore, trying to figure out if we could bend the growth curve there. And then we extended sort of a playbook that we learned to Southeast Asia. And then from there, took that playbook to China and had a lot of success. And today I'm at a stealth startup. So sort of weird to say that. It's pretty big, but it's a stealth startup. And I'm covering APAC. And yeah, just put some photos there that just like different places that I've lived or worked. Yeah, so kind of it's been fun to kind of work in different capacities and then also in different places up till now. So what do I mean by building at scale? You can imagine a time, like in Storied, right, where you're slowly starting to find product market fit, you pivot a bit, and you start to build some scale. As you continue on that path, after you've built your first, big team, you start to get more and more customers. What starts to reveal itself is a whole new set of challenges that you didn't really anticipate. And you sort of have a different tool set when you're coming, or a toolbox when you're coming to this set of problems, right? Oftentimes, and I'll tell you a little bit about what those types of problems are, but oftentimes you'll find that the answers are kind of unknown. Your decisions, because you're at a certain scale, your decisions are, in many ways, sometimes they're still reversible, but it's a lot harder, it's a lot slower to do. And unless you have kind of a rule book or a set of principles to adhere to, you really end up in this zone of paralysis. And so what are those problems? Once you found that kind of initial product fit, and you started to scale your organization, how do you build a team that really cares about what you're doing? I mean, people are going to invest their time. They're gonna work the weekends. And how do you create an environment where people continue to care? beyond the initial product market fit that you found, how do you continually do that? I mean, your customers change, your organization changes. So how do you continually try and find product market fit? And then how do you establish a new North Star? It could change, as market changes, you'll have to change your overall goals. So these are the types of problems that you run into, and it's murky how to solve them. So a while ago, I came up with a set of principles or guidelines that have helped me set myself up to make the right decisions when you have to make those decisions or when you're confronted with a new problem. And so what I thought I'd do today is sort of share those. And so actually I have a much longer list, but decided to cut it down just for this presentation. But as an example, I'll just flashing them on the screen right now, but I'll sort of go through them in more detail. Let's start off with the first one, ownership. So what is ownership? This came out in some of the earlier presentations. Your organization is best served if all of your staff feel like they're a part of the mission and they own, there's a clear line of like them coming up with something, implementing it, and then seeing its impact, right? So how do you do that? How do you develop ownership? Well, the best example here that I found was when I was at AirAsia. If you imagine AirAsia is an airline, low-cost airline. And if you just zoom out and you blur your eyes a little bit, actually, a lot of airlines are very similar, right? They all use the same type of planes. They all have very similar technology. They do differ on brand, but that environment creates an incredibly competitive space where, and you probably know this from your own experience, that you might make a flight decision just based on a couple dollars difference in price. So in that extremely competitive environment, how do you win? Right, and AirAsia has demonstrated some pretty good success here, right? Because they've started out in Malaysia and they've scaled to many countries. And one of the unique things that they did there was they really decentralized a lot of their activities. So you have AirAsia Malaysia, you have AirAsia Thailand, you have AirAsia Indonesia, AirAsia Philippines, and each one of those are sort of replications of each other. So it's like not the best synergy, but what you lose in synergy, you gain in ownership. And what that enables for the team on the ground is they're able to generate ideas, see their impact, and not go through a kind of a whole rigmarole to get something out. And I think that's really one of the keys to success for AirAsia. It's this idea of how they developed ownership as a part of their culture and then allowed for these best ideas to win and for them to lead. That's sort of one rule. Second rule just comes from my experience at Shopify. For those of you who don't know Shopify, it's an e-commerce tool set. So it's a really simple way. If you wanted to sell something, you could probably put up a website in 10 to 20 minutes. Where Shopify has had a ton of success is really building on this direct-to-consumer wave, where brands or artists or creators build an authentic connection with their customers and get their products out into the world. And why Shopify has been successful at that is they sort of really simplified all the technology so that there's no longer a barrier and they could just go to market. And when I was there, we're seeing a lot of success there. But we were starting to look at China and we're saying, well, how do we enter China? How do we make headway? And I'm sure a lot of you on the call will know it's a very different market. And e-commerce and how the typical buying behavior in China is just different. A lot of people buy on marketplaces versus, on a direct-to-consumer website. So, at first glance, when we started, we had a very small business in China when I first started. So we did some analysis, right? We took a step back and say, like, maybe there's a way that we can figure something out. And we sectioned off the market into 3 opportunities. We said, there's a possibility of a domestic opportunity. Maybe there is some direct to consumer stuff happening in China. Maybe we could be the best at it. We throw all our resources at it. There's also an import opportunity where you allow for global products to be sold in China with ease. And we did a bunch of analysis. There is a market there. But then we focused on, we also researched export, where you allow merchants in China to sell to the world. And we found a real resonance there, because merchants at the same time, they also wanted to get connected to their customers, and they also wanted to diversify their revenue streams away from just Amazon, eBay, and Wish as their sort of cross-border platforms. And once we focused in on that, we did some early experiments, where we would just try and get something out, try and iterate. We had a ton of success. It was kind of like an overnight thing. So the lesson for me was really finding the segment to focus in on, really finding the customer to focus in on. And that can sort of take a problem that seems super complicated and very difficult, and then demystify it and just make it a lot easier. Last thing, always make the product better. Product is not just R&D. And this goes back to my time at BlackBerry. This is, for those of you who don't know this is a BlackBerry Storm. And this was like the touchscreen competitor to iPhone that BlackBerry launched. And I can remember when that came out, there's a lot of internal excitement. And I was sitting sort of in the kind of product revenue sort of org. So I didn't get to see it until actually it was like just about to release. And I think it's fair to say that product had a ton of problems. And I think if you could, write an epitaph on BlackBerry, this might be mentioned. And so I'm reflecting back on that, on the launch of Storm, and then the company that I'm currently at, and also at Shopify, there was a core difference, a core cultural difference, and it was that and if you go to Shopify today, they think that everybody's job is a product job. They'll trade sales any day if you're trading those sales to make the product better. And I don't think that was true at BlackBerry. So as you're starting to, scale your business, it's important to keep this idea that it's everybody's job to make the product better. So that means it's your sales teams, it's your support teams, it's things that you wouldn't normally think of as a product job. But if you start to think of it like that, then you get a lot of focus on trying to produce something that's really awesome for your customers. So those are the three that I have. Actually, I spent a lot of time kind of thinking through these and have a couple more. If you want to chat or reach out, please do. I'd happy to dive into any of those in more detail. And also, I did write something on kind of product market fit that would be nice to share too. So just reach out and I'll be happy to share it.